Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Development Control. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet. And could everybody please turn their mobile phones off or put them on silent? Thank you. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I am Chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on the applications on this evening's agenda. To my immediate left and right are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee, not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep to points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning application to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening we have got one item on the agenda, so I anticipate being able to complete it within 3 hours, hopefully. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Thank you. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got Councillor Konechko standing in for Councillor Hussey and Councillor Rattigan standing in for Councillor Frost. Urgent matters, I have none. Minutes of the, sorry, declarations of interest, sorry. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. This is a statement of personal clarification. As many of you will know, during my period of leadership, I was supportive of the Amazon application at Oaktown. That support was only made public once the officer's report was finalised and a recommendation was made. This is a completely new application made for a different main occupier. On Thursday, Councillor Frost asked all Conservative reserves for this committee to replace him as he was predetermined. I spoke to him on Saturday afternoon, having given an opportunity for everyone who may be a reserve to come forward themselves. So I spoke to him on Saturday afternoon and asked him if he was content, because obviously he has a position on this, that I would replace him and not be deemed to be predetermined. He was comfortable with that and agreed that I should phone the chair, which is you, Councillor Robinson, to ask if you were okay with the situation that I was not predetermined and that you were content that I took Councillor Frost's place. You confirmed that you were happy for my attendance tonight, and therefore I contacted on Monday Democratic Services to get the paper and get the viewing panel route and stops so as I could get up to speed with where all the councillors were who attended Friday's viewing panel. I made my intention to be here tonight to Mike Townsend to know and ask if I should inform legal to be aware that of my previous support for the Amazon application. I met with Anne Greaves to discuss this with her, and I remained, because it is my decision, that I was not predetermined on this application. Since then, I have visited the site on 2 occasions, both Monday and again today, questioned residents who were walking through Dummer and had lunch at the Sun Inn. That was my own decision, I have to say, to gauge both noise and the frequency of traffic and see what residents who use that and the owners were having. I am under no illusions that I am not predetermined on this, and I hope that those on this committee that either voted for or against the applications in the past can also say the same. So I am content to be a member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan. Minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of April 2022 and on the 11th of May 2022. I move that they are accurate and I will sign them. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you. Councillor Harvey. Okay. Application for planning permission. Land at Oakdown Farm, Winchester Road, Dummer. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as members will note from your agenda, the application seeks full planning permission for the demolition of 3 dwellings, outbuildings and related structures, those at Oakdown Farm, and the proposed construction of commercial and industrial units of a Class B8 use with ancillary offices. There would also be associated infrastructure works on site, and full details of site levels are provided within the application, along with details of new access arrangements. There's also to be new drainage, tree retention and a diversion of an underground pipeline. If I just run through the first few slides that members have before you, just to orientate you. This is a site that we have been to previously. So we have the M3 extending northeast to southwest to the south of the site. And then we have the A30 running along the northern side of the site. To the northern corner, so where we have the site where it tapers, that land is included within the application site, and that includes a southward corner where there would be alterations for pedestrian and cycling use. Moving around in a slight sort of anti-clockwise direction, you will see a little triangular nib. That is the entrance to Trenchards Lane. Again, there would be alterations there to facilitate a pedestrian and cycling crossing. Continuing in a southwest direction, members will pick up the presence of a new roundabout. That is a roundabout of a 70-metre diameter, which is to sit on the A30. That roundabout would provide the main access into the site for HGV and, well, all vehicular traffic. The existing access to the site, the entrance to Oakdown Farm, which has a tree-lined avenue, would be retained, but downgraded to provide pedestrian and cycle access only. That cycle and pedestrian access would extend within the site from the northeast corner through to the southwest, exiting and on Up Street in Dummer. So moving through the site, members will pick up that there are 3 plots, essentially, with 3 buildings. These are to sit on a level plateau, so there would be excavation and reprofiling of the site. To the north of the buildings, there is the position of the oil pipeline. Again, that would have to be repositioned along approximately 610 metres in length to accommodate the roundabout and the entrance to the site and the site as a whole. Within the site, there would also be retaining walls across the site to the A30 and also stepping through the site between the plots. And between plots 1 and 2, there's also a 15-metre new wildlife corridor. Members will pick up from that site layout plan that there is new landscaping occurring around the entire perimeter of the site. There is also the wildlife corridor extending between plots 1 and 2, which I previously referred to. There is also some planting within the plots and within plots 2 and 3, also within the car park. Exiting at the southwest corner, members will note that this site is actually squared off at that southwest corner where previously there was an indented section where that land was previously excluded from the site. This land is now included and forms part of the woodland planting. To the south of the M3, members will note there is an area there which is currently in agricultural use. That would be given over as new planting to assist with biodiversity gains. I think that's it. Okay, so just picking up on the landscaping plan. Again, there are different types of landscaping to occur on the site. This ranges from meadow grassland, chalk grassland, different seeding types, thicket planting, some ornamental planting through to woodland planting. Again, responding to the different areas within the plot, whether we are looking towards the north in that sort of woodland area, that biodiversity area, through to the south, which also would serve to provide additional screening on views from the A30. Within the site, also providing further biodiversity enhancements are the attenuation ponds, which form part of the drainage scheme, but also are included within the landscaping details. So as I've previously referred to, the site does vary in its current levels, both north to south and east to west, and there would be a reprofiling. So that illustration there is just picking up on the reprofiling as you can see it from the motorway through to the A30. And again, also picking up that there are the three buildings, they'll be sat in parallel, and the buildings are of differing heights, so they are dropping in height as you extend in a southwest direction. Members will be aware of the full details of all the plots, their individual requirements as set out within the agenda, so I won't go through each side for you. What I will do is turn members' attention to the update paper. So on the update paper, we have a summary of the viewing panel that took place last week, with the members attending and where we viewed that from. There are some very minor corrections to the report, and an additional reference to the Dummer Village Design Statement, which was missed from the planning policy section. Members will then note that there are further consultation responses. We have had 3 responses from Dummer Parish Council, which are set out before you. We also have had comments from Historic England, and again, they are summarised for members' benefit, as well as from the North Wessex Downs AONB officer. Since the completion of the agenda report, we have received a further 14 representations expressing objection to the application. These are summarised for you, along with 1 further representation expressing neither objection or support of the application, so they are simply represented as comments. A further objection has also been received from the CPRE. In addition to consultations and public observations, we have also had some additional representations, and if I draw members' attention to the response from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, where we have received correspondence that if the committee are minded to approve the application, then the Secretary of State could issue an Article 31 holding direction, or the local planning authority could not issue a decision notice until the Secretary of State has considered whether or not to call in the application. That decision has not been made, and members will note further on in the update paper that we have just provided further explanation on that. Moving on, the applicant's agent has provided comments in response to the comments from Historic England. Again, they are summarised for your benefit. And then turning to the recommendation, again, a slight amendment to that, just accommodating that request that we have received from the Planning Casework Unit. We have also included a comment about the pre-commencement conditions, where members will have noted from the report that the applicant has the opportunity to consider the inclusion of pre-commencement conditions within any decision. There is also updates to Condition 10 and Condition 43 with regard to the wording for the reason for the conditions. An amendment to Condition 44, which just refers to a drawing reference number. We've also included an additional condition which prevents the insertion of mezzanine floors within the buildings under permitted development rights. In response to everything we've received to the application, we have also provided some officer comments. We've provided some comments in response to the representations from Dummer Parish Council. A response to the public observations, highlighting that actually most of those are including comments that have already previously been detailed within the report and addressed in that frame. And again, just drawing your attention to the response from the casework unit. And just to confirm that this has no bearing on how the committee consider the application tonight. We just simply have to report the outcome to the casework unit tomorrow. And then finally, just an update on the Section 106 agreement. And so I would just finish by highlighting that the application is recommended for permission, subject to completion of Section 106 and conditions as set out within the report and the update paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. If we could have our first speakers, which is Julian Jones and Miss S. Illman, to the speakers' chairs. Good evening to you both. You have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening. There are many concerns I could raise in the limited time available to me. I will only point out that Lidl report that they have over 3,000 vacancies across their business and have contacted the government to explore a solution. Now we'll focus on the landscape. The site viewing was from the same locations used for the previous applications. The site cannot be seen from 3 of these locations. The viewing panel did not walk the path to North Waltham or visit the locations at Tower Hill or Dummer Cemetery, which are identified in the conservation appraisal as important vistas where the site could be viewed within its landscape context. Instead, they walked onto the site and looked out over the A3 and M3. Our landscape expert, Sue Illman, will introduce herself and describe the Parish Council's landscape concerns.
I am a chartered landscape.
Could you put your mic?
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm a chartered landscape architect, managing director of Illman Young, a past president of the Landscape Institute, and an honorary fellow of the Society of the Environment and the University of Gloucestershire. The Parish Council object to this application because it doesn't comply with the recent sensitivity analysis commissioned by this council, which assessed this site as only suitable for limited development towards its northern end. This proposal is certainly not limited, nor at its northern end, with the line of buildings and parking extending to over 1 kilometre in length, and the whole elevated on a plateau 9 metres above the A30. Similarly, it doesn't comply with the local plan's environmental approach that considers the landscape context for new developments. EP1, criterion G, requires that landscape impacts must be mitigated. They aren't. EM1 requires proposals to be sympathetic to the character and visual quality of the area and must respect and enhance the character or visual amenity of the landscape. It doesn't. EM10 requires new development to be of high quality and based upon a robust, also object to the comprehensive lighting scheme that will be operational all night when this area is site's gross overdevelopment. The mass and scale of the buildings and its lack of physical and visual be fully mitigated even after 15 years from numerous viewpoints. It's a shame
You have 1 minute.
that the recent site walk from each location. Turning to the Council's internal consultation responses, the Urban Design Officer now suggests that the main building is smaller and a significant improvement. But lowering the roof line by just over 1 metre when its level is 31 metres above the A30 makes a negligible difference. But he's failed to notice that the building is now 120 metres longer, that's a third, than the previous one. He admires the tree line character of the A30, but ignores the proposed removal of 120 metres of it that cannot be replaced. The Landscape Officer's view is simplistic and non-committal, then suggests that as warehouses are typically located along motorways, that this could be acceptable. That statement has no regard for its landscape context, visibility, scale or appearance, and would set an open-door precedent for any future developer to use. Put simply, these buildings should not be here.
Thank you. If you could turn your microphone off, please. Thank you. Questions to the speakers? I have none, so thank you. Oh, Councillor Gaskell, thank you.
Thank you. A couple of questions. You mentioned the physical size of the building, and it said in the report that it's gone smaller. But could you sort of describe what you feel about the actual height of it? Because it also discusses levelling the soil out. So has the actual ground level gone higher?
Are you talking about the change that happened today?
We're just talking about this planning application compared with the last application.
In the report that I wrote originally, as opposed to this being my summary, I set out the various levels. So it depends where you want to measure it, because the plateau level has changed and the roof line has changed. But if you take the overall height, then the level has changed from 170 metres AOD for the original application, and it was until sometime today 168.88. So that changed by sort of 1.1 metres, and apparently there's another 612 millimetres been lopped off it. So when you're standing on the A30 looking up at 30 plus metres of building, I really don't think those minimal changes are really going to make much difference to what you perceive.
Do you want to mention the footprint?
But I think the difference is also about the scale and length of this building. You know, building one is 120 metres longer.
Thank you. You turn your microphone off again. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, from your landscape experience, could you tell me your view of the point from Dummer and the conservation area and your particular perspective on that, please?
Well, I think the point is that I think there's 7 of the viewpoints that they've identified where it cannot be mitigated within the 15-year period, which is the sort of maximum where we're assessing the effectiveness of mitigation. So I would suggest that that is significant, and it's certainly significant to the local residents. And I'd just say, as I say, I think it was very unfortunate that having gone on a site visit and visited viewpoints, when you've had drawings produced in a document where you are supposed to have them at an A1 size, and stand and look at the viewpoint, then hold those drawings in front of you and have the vision of what it will really look like. So I have to say, why was that opportunity not allowed to the committee to fully understand the implications of that building from those specific viewpoints? I mean, just print the drawings at A1 and have a look.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. Can I just ask, I mean, obviously I drove to Scotland to see my football team on Saturday. Along all the major motorways of England, the M1, the M6, are warehousing. Would you concur that these are the normal places to site warehousing within the country?
Well, I really don't see the fact that we need to see a country that's got warehouses end to end down a motorway. They are not in places where they are sensitive landscapes.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Again, in comparison between this application and the previous one, you mentioned the height difference and the length difference between building 1. Obviously, the previous application didn't have the same number of buildings, and when we went on the site viewing, from one perspective, it was pointed out to us that buildings 2 and 3 would be visible even after the 15-year period, whereas building 1 wouldn't be. Are you able to comment on any changes that building 3 will have compared to the previous application regarding overall impact on the views out of Dummer?
Yeah, well, you're going to see all 3 of them after 15 years. And that is from 2 of the key viewpoints. And that is what's shown in some of these photomontages. I mean, I actually have 2, I printed out 2 of them at A1, should anybody wish to see them. They're not my material, they are the applicant's information. And I think had you had those with you when you visited sites, you would have understood what it would look like more realistically. Because looking at it this size in on an A4 sheet is meaningless.
Thank you. Councillor Gaskell.
Chair, can we see those drawings?
Could you repeat that, please?
We've been told the drawings are here. Is it possible to see them?
No, it's not. All documentation submission ended before today. Thank you. No more questions?
Excuse me, could I just say, sorry to interrupt, but these are
Sorry,
not my documents.
you are here at the moment to answer
They're
questions.
the applicant's documents.
You are here to answer questions, not make a statement. Your speaking time has ended. Sorry about that. Councillor Harvey.
Can I just clarify? Are you saying that the document in question is a document we already have, and is in fact the applicant's evidence already presented as part of the application?
That's correct.
Therefore, if it's a document that's already in front of us, does that change the matter? It's nothing new. It's not a new introduction of information. It's merely a different representation.
Thank you. There are no more questions. Thank you very much. There's a pot of wipes in front of you. If you could just wipe down everything you've touched for the benefit of the next occupant, that'd be much appreciated. And next speakers are Maria Miller MP, County Councillor Stephen Reid and Professor Jay Holden. Good evening to you all. I believe Maria Miller is the first to speak. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. If you press the button on the deck, the red light will come on the microphone. That's it.
Thank you. Councillors, I'm here with enormous humility because councillors take decisions on planning applications, not members of Parliament. But I'm here because this application for 3 distribution warehouses has implications for everybody I represent and everybody you represent. And I respectfully ask this committee to reject this application today because a decision to proceed could jeopardise the preferred site for a new hospital the NHS want to build on land adjacent to Oakdown Farm to replace our current hospital that was built in the 70s. Now, the new hospital site was chosen by the NHS because the ambulance service say it would save lives. Why? Because the roads would get the sickest patients to the life-saving healthcare they need far faster. And after much planning, the new Basingstoke Hospital is scheduled for public consultation later this year. Now, the proposed warehouses would add huge numbers of lorries, vans and cars onto the roads night and day, affecting the capacity of the roads to be able to meet the needs of the preferred hospital site. But of course, unfortunately, that application from the NHS can't be sent to you for approval until after the NHS completes its public consultation, a condition that commercial applications don't have to fulfil. Councillors, I believe there is a way forward. Development in this area is not part of the local plan. It's well outside of the settlement boundary. And in February, Basingstoke Council confirmed in a briefing to MPs that after gathering evidence, the Regulation 18 consultation on the new local plan would commence after the May elections. So rather than approving anything today, agree to consider the 3 warehouses as part of the new local plan process, where elected members can take competing demands equally into account. Now, members also know that the Highways Agency are concerned about the motorway safety at junctions 7 and 8 because they're too close together. But the Highways Agency don't know the cumulative impact on motorway safety of the 3 new warehouses, plus the 1,750 new houses already under construction in that area, the new homes that you propose for Southern Manydown, and the preferred site for a new hospital. There's no analysis because it was never the plan to develop this area now. Now, one thing we do know is there is absolutely no funding to improve the safety at Junction 7 in the government's road investment strategy any time before 2030. So members, taking this decision today in isolation of the new local plan means using up current motorway capacity on the commercial warehouses, knowing that there's no money to expand motorway capacity if it's needed for new homes at Manydown South or the new regional NHS hospital.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Homes and healthcare should be the council's priority over commercial warehouses, particularly when local employers have more job vacancies than people to fill them in Basingstoke Borough, and this has been the case for most of the last 10 years. 5 Hampshire MPs are so concerned about this application, we've written to the Secretary of State to ask it to be called in. But I have to issue a serious word of caution. Call-in powers are used very sparingly. Just 15 were undertaken for the whole country last year. You cannot rely on the government to intervene through a call-in process and deliver the outcome you want. If you believe this plan for 3 distribution warehouses should be halted, you need to vote to halt it today. You cannot rely on the call-in process, which is a public inquiry chaired by planning inspectors, nothing to do with MPs. Every councillor needs to vote for what is best for our community, and I hope you might agree to vote against this application today and to look at it as part of the new local plan process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid and Professor Holden, you have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. How you divide the time between you is up to you. Mrs. Miller, could you turn your microphone off? Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm here on behalf of Cage, but I don't want to repeat what's in the document that you've all seen. As it stands, there's very little difference between this proposal and the one that this committee turned down for very good reasons by a majority of 9-2 just last year. The occupants of a building are of course irrelevant for planning purposes. You will know already that this proposal breaches 3 planning regulations and a further 3 council policies, and that if any jobs are created, they will simply add to the list of vacancies. Neither do I want to talk about Dummer, despite the obvious adverse impact that these warehouses would have on my friends and my neighbours and my community. Now, the main focus here should be on what this development would do to Basingstoke. When I first came here over 40 years ago to set up a business at the top of the town, Basingstoke was something of a music hall joke. But thanks to a sustained period of enlightened investment, the Borough Council has changed all that. Not least amongst their achievements has been the attention paid to the planting of trees and flowers on the routes into town, making it an attractive place to work and to live and a place to be proud of. This proposal flies in the face of all that good work. These warehouses would be an uglification project. As this committee itself rightly concluded last time, they would ruin the landscape and the approach into town. And just think what message these warehouses would send to Basingstoke residents. Giant, anonymous boxes show a lack of ambition and a poverty of imagination. It's simply not good enough for the people of this town. If we must have development here, then let it be something with good architecture that blends with the landscape and provides space for local businesses, which businesses here really need, or a science park. Above all, make it something with local character that enhances the approach to the town rather than spoils it. Frankly, I would personally rather have green fields, but if we are to have a gateway to Basingstoke, then let's have something we can be proud of, something with vision and panache, but not this. Basingstoke deserves better.
Thank you, Chairman. I oppose this application. It's big, it's intrusive, it's a lousy gateway for Basingstoke, and it's only part of a picture that nobody has painted yet. So why are you discussing this planning application tonight? It's because the developers have made you discuss it. You weren't intending to go down this road as a council. This land is unplanned, it's outside the current local plan, and that's important. Being outside the settlement policy boundary means that you've not had chance to consider the bigger picture for the southwest of Basingstoke. You've had no chance to decide... Sorry?
You have 1 minute remaining.
You've had no chance to decide what's best for Basingstoke. You've had no consultation on that vision with the people of Basingstoke. You have no idea whether it will jeopardise the hospital. You have no idea what the bigger picture will do to the road system. This isn't planning, Chairman, it's just development, prompted by the desires of the developers, not the needs of the borough. So if you go down this road, we won't have planning in Basingstoke, just development, one field at a time, being picked off, not in accordance with a plan, but according to the whims of the developers. So, in my opinion, it's time for the council to take back control. This site is outside the settlement policy boundary. It's outside the current local plan. You can turn it down. Tell the watching developers you want the southwest of Basingstoke, including this field, to be properly planned, consulted on, got right, and
Can I have to ask you
included
to wind
in the
up,
next
please?
local plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, questions for the speakers? And if you could turn the microphone off, please, Mr. Reid. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for Mrs Miller. Good evening. You made reference to the Highways Agency, whether that's Traffic England or Highways England, they changed their name, having concerns over Junction 7 and 8. The paperwork that we have available to us did originally give a holding response to say don't give planning permission until we've had a chance to look at everything. And the subsequent response says, whilst there are concerns there, they feel that there's capacity, they don't see any safety risks, and any queues will be contained within the slip roads. So my question is, if you forgive this, you obviously know a little bit more than we do, or do you? And why are we getting a different story to perhaps that story you're suggesting is the truth? Thank you.
Chair, in answer to that, I would never suggest that anything untruthful was being put forward to the committee. What I am saying is that the Highways Agency or Highways England do not know, because they haven't yet done the analysis, what the cumulative impact would be of the application before you today, on top of the 1,750 houses that you've given planning applications for already on that stretch of the A30, on top of southern Manydown developments, which I don't know what this committee or others are thinking of, but it will be in the many hundreds of houses, on top of a regional hospital. And the reason they don't know the answer to that is because it was always going to be part of the local plan, the new local plan development scheme of work for the south of Basingstoke. So Councillor Reid is entirely right to say that you will be making this decision in many ways in the dark, not knowing what that cumulative impact would be. I think the piece of information I do know that wasn't in the paperwork, and I got it straight from Highways England, is that there is no funding in the government's road investment strategy, which ends in 2030, for there to be any improvements of the M3. And I think that's critical for this committee to appreciate, because if you were to make subsequent decisions around southern Manydown and also the decisions around the hospital, then you may well be left not able to be positive about those, because the Highways Agency, Highways England, then come back to you and say, sorry, there's no capacity on the M3, you used it all up with the warehouse. And for my money, I want to see my taxpayer money and your taxpayer money going to create capacity for the hospital, not for a commercial venture, which is entirely speculative and not something this council was seeking out.
Thank you.
Can you turn your microphone off again, please? Thank you. Councillor Connect, go.
Thank you very much, Chair. Another question for Maria, if possible, please. I was hoping to get some clarification just about the likelihood of the hospital actually being located on that site. I mean, my understanding is that we were given funding by the government to put together a business case for a new hospital, and obviously that business case might then be rejected by the government, and we might keep our existing hospital. So I was just trying to get a better understanding of the degree of certainty that this new hospital will be created, and it will be created on that site. Thank you.
Chair, thank you so much. It is, just for clarification, the Basingstoke Hampshire Hospital Trust is one of 40 hospital trusts that have been identified to have a new hospital by the government, and that is in writing. But the councillor is absolutely right to say this would be on a phased approach. And of course, it's always subject to making the case. The NHS is not quick in its processes. It's not as quick as a commercial operation such as the one that you're considering today. But the site that has been identified is the preferred site for the hospital. To give you an idea of how imminent that is, I actually have the Minister visiting by chance tomorrow to talk to the hospital about their plans, and those plans will be going to public consultation in line with the NHS wishes later this year. So, of course, there are never any guarantees in anything because this is a very long-term plan, and the NHS haven't built hospitals in a generation. The last round of hospitals that were built were actually done under private finance initiatives. The NHS had almost nothing to do with them. So this is a very different plan of work and therefore taking longer for the NHS to get its head around. But I guess the question for councillors this evening is, do you want to risk standing in the way of the most preferred site, not just of the NHS, but of the ambulance service because of its ability to be able to get the sickest people to the best care? Do you want to risk jeopardising that site because you're taking this decision in isolation and not able to consider the hospital site alongside the commercial site? I think it's just, I can't see why you would want to take those decisions separately. You would want to take them together in the best interests of the people that you represent.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. The County Council referred to an overall scheme. I'm not sure we got all the detail of that. Perhaps you'd just like to elucidate just a bit more.
Thank you, Councillor Court. I'm aware that the Borough Council has published a document which lays out conceptually, I think, how the southwest of Basingstoke could be developed. But it is very much an emerging school of thought, I think, that document. I don't put any severe planning weight on that document. It's food for thought, it's a discussion, it's so on. So I believe that you still do not have a vision for what the southwest of Basingstoke will look like. And not having a vision for what the southwest of Basingstoke will look like, you cannot know whether this piece of the jigsaw will comfortably fit into that jigsaw because it hasn't yet been designed. So, but what it could do is it could negate your flexibility for the fields around because you make the mistake of putting something this big, this intrusive, and this dominant into it. My belief, therefore, is that you need to take that document, flesh it out, put it into the local plan as a proposal, consult the people of Basingstoke, get it right, and then make big decisions like this. If you make big decisions like this without doing your homework first, you'll get it wrong and you'll live to regret it, and so will the people of Basingstoke. So I urge to look at this as a planning exercise, not just the development of a single field.
Chair, there was a bit of the question that I missed in, the answer I missed to the previous question. Would you mind if I just...
Providing you are answering a question, yes.
Yes, sorry, the councillor, who asked... The other point, which I think is very relevant in how likely is it that we're going to actually have a hospital, which is pretty pertinent to this discussion, is that it's been estimated by the NHS that there are £700 million worth of repairs and maintenance that are required at our hospital in Basingstoke in the next 30 years. And that is about the same cost as building a new hospital. So that is why the NHS put our hospital onto the list for replacement, because it is nonsensical to spend £700 million on a building when you could actually build a new one, an entirely new building, for exactly the same cost, and probably more cheaply, given how much building costs are rising at the moment, given rates of inflation. I think that was a pertinent point to add, and I apologise for not having it in my initial answer, Chair.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Councillor Rattigan, sorry, I missed you.
Thank you, Chair. Maria, can I ask how many times have you attended a DC meeting in your time as an MP?
Chair, I can confirm that I've only ever attended one other meeting of the council to speak, and that was actually, I think, just after I was elected. I don't routinely attend these meetings, Chair, because they often occur when Parliament is sitting. I have, due to the good grace of my whips, been allowed to come along today, not least of which because I am actually speaking on behalf of my two other fellow Basingstoke MPs, Councillor Jarwardner and Councillor Malthouse, and also, as I said in my submission, I have gained the support of five in total, Hampshire MPs, to ask for a call-in of this application process. So I thought it only courteous to come along to explain my reasons for doing that today. And Councillor Robinson, I did also watch online the initial version of this meeting, which I don't think was open to the public.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair, for your allowance of this. The fact that you've come along today with the permission of your whips indicates that this is you feel this is much more of a threat than the previous application was rejected here. Can you explain in planning terms why that is?
I think that's the wrong analysis to draw from my presence here. I wasn't able to attend the first run of this committee because I think it was still done, well, it was still online. And the second one I wasn't able to attend because it was held when Parliament was sitting and I wasn't able to absent myself. The reason for my attendance today isn't really to do with any changes in the application, because in essence, the impact on the hospital site is as real in this application as it was in the previous application, because the site for the new preferred site for the new hospital has been determined primarily by its access, its routes, its local network of roads, particularly the M3, which already suffers, as is pointed out in the paperwork, from significant problems with weaving, because those two junctions, junctions 7 and 8, are too close together. And therefore, any additional traffic on that motorway risks making the hospital application unviable. So I think to draw any inference from my attendance at this meeting, not the last one, because of any changes in the application process, I think would be probably incorrect.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, and thank you, Maria. That was an answer. I'd like to draw out the point, though, that you have indicated that the government is under financial pressure. We know that. We've seen it in the Chancellor's report to Parliament over the last few days. The fact that some funding for roundabouts will come from a private company rather than from the public purse has to be a benefit to the hospital. Do you not concur with that?
The impact of a regional hospital on the local road network, coupled with 3 giant warehouses, is not going to be solved by one roundabout or even 2 roundabouts, however big they might be. My concern is the impact not only on the road networks, and I have to say, Chair, the impact on my residents in Hatchwarren and Kempshott, who already have significant problems with those single-lane access into town, and that will only be made worse by this, but particularly to the point that I'm speaking to today with regards to the hospital. There is no mention in this about improving the congestion problems on the M3. There is no money in the government's budgets to do so. And so using up that capacity which the Highways Agency has identified in their submission to you through a commercial venture, which will produce jobs that the paperwork shows you, the submissions show you, that they will find very difficult to fill locally in Basingstoke because we have such record high levels of employment, seems to me to be the wrong use of a public asset, which is capacity on roads. And that's why I'm here today, because I believe we should be making sure that the capacity on our road system, particularly our motorway system, should be used not to generate more jobs. It should be to generate the hospital care for the people who we've attracted to our town over the last 40 years, and we've attracted them in record numbers, 4 times the level of other communities throughout our country. We owe it to them to make sure we put healthcare first.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Professor Holden and invite both Maria and Stephen to also answer this in regard to the important comments you passed on landscape? Could you please expand on them? You mentioned in terms of the ugly nature of the development. Could you just confirm to me your view of the landscape issues as you perceive them to be relating to the application and the impact, for example, on Dummer, or for example, on the south of the town?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the warehouses are obviously enormous, and one thing which hasn't really been mentioned so far is the fact that they would be operational 24 hours a day, so there would be terrible light pollution as well as traffic pollution coming from this. They're clearly ugly. I mean, anyone who drives past any of these warehouses anywhere around the country is well aware of the ugliness of these things. People regularly say to me when they go past Andover, gosh, I'm glad I don't live there. What on earth are they thinking? I don't want the same thing to happen to Basingstoke. I don't want people to be driving down here and saying, oh, Basingstoke, that's the place with those ugly great warehouses that we see every time we drive past. It's clearly a visual intrusion, and it cannot be mitigated, either down the A30 or the M3 or coming out from the town. As I say, I've lived in the village I've served in the village as a church warden, as a parish councillor. I've served in Basingstoke and in various capacities as well. And I do not want to see this blight on the town that I've come to love.
To that, Chairman, because I think Paul did invite. This is where I think planning on a complete basis comes in. I'm not here tonight to say this field must never be built on. But if you asked me what should go on there, my vision for discussion would be a hospital on one side of the A30 and a science park, which has been discussed by the Borough Council, on this piece of land. And the two could create a synergy together, that the businesses that operate in the science park could be supportive of the hospital, and the demands of the hospital could be supportive of the businesses, and that would be so much better a gateway to Basingstoke than the huge and obtrusive buildings that are being discussed here. Now, you might think that's a good idea, you might think it's a bad idea, but the point I'm making to you is that without having a discussion like that, if you just pass this tonight, you hand over the planning permission and you deny yourselves the ability to have that discussion. And I think that councillors must be seen to be planning Basingstoke and not just jumping when the developers say so.
Councillor Howard.
Chair, in answer to Councillor Harvey's question, this council has for many years, indeed under Councillor Harvey's leadership as well, struggled with how we generated a good gateway for Basingstoke. And indeed, I think I've spent many thousands of pounds on consultants' reports on the importance of having the right gateway for the town. And that is why I was so perplexed when this application first came forward, and indeed perplexed that it's kept coming forward, because it's so inconsistent with all of the briefings that I have attended now over a decade and a half on the aspiration and the ambition that this borough council has for our amazing town. And this is not the gateway that fits into any of those briefings I've been given over a decade and a half. And the types of jobs it creates are also not consistent with the sorts of jobs that people in Basingstoke are looking for, which would be, and I have an aspiration that they're looking for as well, in terms of high pay, high value jobs. We at the moment have significant problems with filling jobs in our town and creating hundreds of more
Mrs.
jobs.
Miller, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you are not answering a question, and we are in questions to the speakers.
Sorry, I apologise.
And you have moved from answering the question into extending your speaking time, which I'm sorry I can't allow. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. This, again, is a question for whoever wants to answer it. The Professor might be best placed because I think he touched on my point more than anybody else. You specifically spoke about uglification. Now, I would like you to try and reconcile two opposing points, or points I feel oppose each other, that you, as a speaking trio, have made, between warehouses representing uglification, but a hospital somehow not doing the same thing. Similarly, issues of 24-hour light pollution, noise pollution, operation. I would like to be pointed to a hospital that only operates from 9 till 5. So if you can speak a little bit about how the questions you've brought up around the hospital being, it being the preferred type for the hospital, and how that would be somehow a better gateway into the town for us versus some warehouses, considering to me they represent identical problems.
Okay, well, I don't think they do represent identical problems, principally because they're on two different sites. The warehouses will be seen from the motorway. They are adjacent to the village. We're not being NIMBY-ish about this. We perfectly accept that there's something like a science park, which should have great mitigation for the visual intrusion that it might have, might be a possibility. But the hospital would be on the other side of the A30. It would be possible to screen it. It would certainly have a higher quality of architecture. There would be the possibility of extensive planting around it and decent approaches to it. It wouldn't be visible from the M3 going straight into town, unlike these warehouses. So I think there are two very, very different cases there. And the light pollution, again, same thing. Distance would make a difference.
Chair, it's correct to raise that point, and in answer to the point that's been raised, those issues would have to be considered. Both the nature of the building and the light pollution would have to be considered as part of a planning application to this committee. My point would be it would be far better for the committee members to be able to look at applications or look at these things side by side rather than taking such a piecemeal approach. And I know that the issues around the quality of the building is something that would be very important to the NHS and to the Hospital Trust.
Chairman, just to add one bit to that, I was until recently one of the hospital governors, so we were discussing the potential new hospital. It's a large site, and the preliminary or example drawings that I saw showed...
I'm sorry, Councillor Reid, you're not answering a question that has been asked. We're not in debate.
Well, the question was, how does this differ from the warehouses? And the point I wanted to make, Chairman, was that the drawings I saw were very different from those of warehouses. The warehouses here are shoehorned into a comparatively small site. The hospital could be done much better and the architecture much more attractive so that people are proud to see it there.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yeah. Thank you very much. If you could have a wipe down with the wipes that are there, that would be much appreciated. Next speakers are John Barker, Joe Davies, and Oliver McGuinness. Good evening to you. You have 8 minutes between you. How you divide that up is entirely up to you. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening. I'm John Barker, Development Director at Newlands. Thank you for letting me speak this evening. Firstly, I would like to say we have listened to the concerns raised previously, together with the reasons for refusal with our previous application. The proposals before you tonight address those concerns around trees, ecology and landscape visual. When we came before your committee late last year, there were frustrations we couldn't name our anchor occupier. With this new application, I'm delighted to confirm that Lidl will be the anchor tenant. Lidl's property director, Oliver McGuinness, is here this evening to explain more about Lidl's substantial proposed investment in Basingstoke and to answer your questions. I'm also delighted to say we are in discussions with several local occupiers in regards to buildings 2 and 3. We have made significant changes in our new application. Those changes include reducing the scale of the development by 60%, cutting traffic by 75%, reducing the visual impact, lowering the roof heights of buildings by 1 to 3 metres across the site, and repositioning one of the buildings so it is less visible from the A30. Retaining and protecting the avenue of 67 oak trees. Applying in full across the whole site, giving members certainty over what will be developed across the site. I just want to be very clear on the perceived highways concerns. As with previous applications, both National Highways and Hampshire County Council Highways have confirmed they have no objections to this application, confirming the proposal will not increase safety risks. There would be no detriment to the operation of Junction 7 or the A30 southward corner. We have included a suite of measures to support the Council's climate emergency agenda. Our buildings would meet the highly energy efficient BREEAM excellent standard, which very few logistics buildings attain. This includes on-site renewable energy with PV on roofs and air source heat pumps. We're also investing £1.4 million in bus services and cycle lanes, which will not only benefit and serve our proposals, but also future developments in the southwest quadrant of Basingstoke. My final point is about investment and jobs. At a time of economic uncertainty and escalating cost of living, the proposals would create approximately 1,500 well-paid and wide-ranging jobs. I would now like to hand over to Oliver.
Thank you, John. Good evening, councillors. As John said, I'm Oliver McGuinness, Property Director of Lidl. I've sat and listened to what's been heard, and there's a lot of negativity in the room. I wish to inject some positivity about what this scheme can actually provide, and as the anchor end user, this is what I'm hoping to do. If you're minded to grant the application here this evening, then the Lidl element of this scheme will provide the following key benefits, and I'll put these into 3 main sections: jobs, sustainability and investment. Firstly, jobs. Lidl would provide 800 jobs as part of this development, of which 600 of these roles will be provided within the main core warehouse function. Our warehouse colleagues will benefit from Lidl's market-leading wages. Our entry-level pay is above both the national living wage and the real living wage, something we are incredibly proud of. All Lidl colleagues will also have access to the following benefits: automatic enrolment in Lidl's contributory pension scheme and 10% discount for their weekly shop in any Lidl store, which has never been more important. We would also be delighted to work with the Basingstoke College of Technology through the proposed employment and skills plan to deliver a variety of employment and training opportunities. We have successfully done this before in our Southampton distribution centre. Additionally, Lidl is already part of the National Apprenticeship Scheme, with around 20% of our existing warehouse colleagues taking the opportunity for training and development. Secondly is sustainability. Lidl is a carbon neutral business. This is fact. We purchase 100% of our renewable energy and have offset the remaining greenhouse gas emissions with our associated direct business operations. In February, we were named by Which as the joint most sustainable supermarket. As part of our national Feed It Back campaign, we donate surplus food to local communities, and we already have existing partnerships here in Basingstoke. Surplus food that cannot be donated is then used to create biomethane gas, which is used to fuel 10% of our haulage fleet. This represents a 90% reduction in carbon emissions versus diesel. Lidl will be investing in sustainable technologies such as solar PV to cover a large area of the roof above and beyond your policy requirements. This will provide 20% of the building's energy. 37 electrical vehicle charging points with capacity for more if needed. A comprehensive building management scheme that significantly reduces energy and water consumption. A great example of this is we recover the heat generated from our refrigeration systems and use this to heat the building. Importantly, we have committed to invest £15 billion in the British food and farming sectors by 2025, as 2/3 of our permanent products in store come from British suppliers. 3, an investment. Lidl is planning to purchase of the freehold if approved here this evening. We are then committed to spending a further 9-figure sum on this state-of-the-art warehousing facility. This is an investment for Lidl in the long term. We want Basingstoke to become one of our strategically important locations. The Lidl share of annual rateable value for the wider development would be in the region of £4.5 million per year. However, the biggest investment that we are proposing to make is in the 800 colleagues that would be employed if the application was approved here. Their continued training and development is vital to the success of our business. So hopefully, members, you can now take account and be fully aware of the benefits that we would provide as the confirmed end user in terms of our job creation, sustainable ethos and our long-term investment we want to make into Basingstoke. I'll now pass back to John to provide a short summary.
Thank you, Oliver. Our proposed development before you this evening has directly responded to all previous reasons for refusal made by this committee, attracts officer support and meets the provision of policies in your own development plan. I sincerely hope on this basis you feel confident to support your officer's clear recommendation. Thank you for listening and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Councillor Howard-Sorrell, followed by Councillor Freeman, followed by Councillor Court, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have 3 questions, but I'm only allowed 2, so I'm going to try and roll 2 of them into one. So if it seems a bit jilted, I apologise. My first question is, have you done any assessment on the availability of local people to become staff? Because we've heard tonight issues around shortages of people to fill the available job roles within the local area and across the country as a whole. And also, how would that, sorry, this is where I'm struggling. Would there be any impact from your perspective on housing availability, since we already have a lack of a 5-year land supply, in terms of if you did have to bring staff in from other areas of the country, in terms of the fact that there might not be enough here already to fill your vacancies? Sorry, that wasn't the most, yeah.
Without wishing to answer a question with a question, was that question for me as the plot
Anybody
one
that
occupier? Or?
can answer it. I'm mostly probably you, since you're the occupier. But.
Okay. For me, the number one thing I consider when I plan where our strategic assets will be is the availability of staff. Without the availability of staff, our facilities are effectively useless. I've been in charge of planning the strategic infrastructure for Lidl for the last 15 years, and it is the number one requirement. It forms a large part of our analysis and our consideration, and we are happy that the statistics and the availability of staff and the labour workforce is sufficient. Otherwise, councillors, we simply wouldn't be making this application.
I think there's just a second point to that, and I've raised this because it was raised by the last speakers. You have got a local plan process. That local plan process required you to identify the amount of employment you needed to have a sustainable community during that plan period. If I can take you back to 2016, in 2016, in January, you as a council approved a hospital on the site that was being discussed here today. In April, you then also went to a local plan inquiry. So that local plan inquiry considered a hospital and this site for employment. And the inspector concluded that you as a council hadn't identified enough employment land and that your plan would be unsound without including additional employment land. And therefore, you ended up with a policy, which we are considering this application under, which is EP1, that you can bring additional employment land for distribution forward on sites during the plan period that were not allocated for. So the suggestion that you don't need this land And the suggestion that this hasn't been considered as a whole is simply wrong.
Excellent. Now for my third/second question. It was raised with the last application, obviously a different occupier, future job availability in terms of automation being a threat to low-skilled jobs, essentially. Can you give us any assurances? Obviously, we can't enforce any of it, but can you at least promise or commit that there won't be jobs that only appear for 5 years and then are gone and replaced by robots?
I think, Councillor, you can. A condition was added regarding mezzanines, I believe. Our buildings do not have mezzanines. We have not applied for any mezzanines in the building. That is something that the planning process can control. The operation of our building is goods in, sorted into high-level racks, into goods out. It's what we call a cross-dock facility. The inclusion of mezzanines, which is the predominant driver of automation, is controlled in the committee report in front of you.
Thank you for that. So you're giving an assurance in a public forum that there won't be any efforts made to try and automate jobs away. I appreciate that there's nothing now, but I was mainly driving towards you giving us an assurance.
Yeah. In our 13 distribution centres that are operational in the UK, we have extremely limited automation.
Thank you. If you could turn your microphone off. Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Part of what I was going to say is covered by Councillor Howard Sorrell in regards to current vacancies, because there are hundreds of warehouse vacancies within the Basingstoke area. I know, I checked. So I will go on to my second question, which surrounds public transport to the site. I see from the report that you're proposing a transport system where the bus picks people up. Now, it said in the scheme that money is available to run this for 2 years, but the bus would be expected to be self-sufficient after 3 years. But what happens with that intervening year, and how are you proposing to fund it? And indeed, what happens if that bus service is not self-supporting after the 2 years? Will you cancel it, or will you still be providing it so that people can get to work? Or will they be expected then to revert to using their cars?
Thank you for the question. So just to clarify the position around the DRT, the demand responsive transport. So through the process and working with Hampshire County Council through the application determination, and obviously providing them with further information, the agreed strategy is that we will fund a new bus service that will be operated by Stagecoach, and we're already in discussions with Stagecoach around that, and this has all been concluded with the public transport officer at Hampshire. The service that we intend to provide will be funded for a period of time, and the financial contribution that we're making to that is £1.2 million. We are also looking at the ways that that service can not only serve the employees on the development site, but also benefit along the routes to and from where it's coming with additional stops. We do this type of Section 106 obligation on lots of schemes around the UK. Yeah, we're very confident that that scheme will be fully operational and sustainable, given the amount of employees that we hope will be using it on site.
Thank you.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thanks for your time on Friday. Much appreciated. And also for the sight of the video presentation which I saw today. This one's a relatively simple one. The other ones have already been asked and answered. Thank you. How long would you expect the construction to take, if approved?
12 to 18 months.
Many thanks. No supplementary.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for Mr McGuinness. Good evening. It was very warming to hear that you declared Lidl carbon zero business, which is welcoming. Solar PV on the roof. Our report says 15% of your usage. You said 20. It's a similar figure. would you give a commitment that if you bought this place, which you were saying you potentially become there, that you would put 100% solar on that roof and become a net exporter or work with a solar company to actually help Basingstoke meet its carbon zero and indeed your own? Certainly we've got it till 2030 is our target, but you're going to obviously, you're going to be 80% down, and you can see where I'm coming from. But this is something, sadly, that was missed from the previous sort of comments on previous application. Thank you.
Okay, so in answer to that question, before I answer the question about specifically for Basingstoke, all new warehouses we build around the UK have solar PV installed. We are retrofitting on all warehouses where the roofs are capable. I smile because I think back to the Southampton Planning Committee where the members of that committee put a condition on that our steelwork had to be sufficiently strong enough to put solar PV. And I look back with a smile on my face as we go to install solar PV on our Southampton warehouse in October of this year. So our commitment is there to do it. On this particular site, if we have a roof plan available, you'll see that I can't give you a commitment for 100%, but there's an operational reason. It's because we have roof strip lights going across half of the building. But the commitment I can give to you is where we have blank roofs, we will put solar PV because there are a couple of reasons. One, the payback period allows us to invest and it makes good financial, economical sense. Also, it can provide our building with 25% of energy usage. Everyone knows what's happening with energy bills at the moment. And we're doing this all over our estate because it makes business sense. So as much as I can give you a commitment in this forum, we're retrofitting solar panels on every warehouse we can, and it is our plan to install them to the full capacity we can because it's good all round to do so.
So would you be happy with us discussing later some form of condition that would give you some sort of timeline so that we've got something to work to?
If the local plan policies allow a condition, because what we can't do is ask me to do something that your policies don't support, but if your policies do support it, whether that be a sustainability condition or a BREEAM condition, I can give you the commitment here and now, we will be installing solar PV on this. How that is linked to the planning consent, I'll look to the front of the room and ask for their guidance. But my statement here is clear to you. Yes, we will.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions, if I can.
Councillor Rattigan, before you start, we have a strict rule at this committee of 2 questions.
2 questions. Then I will try and wrap them up.
So please, if you can prioritise your most important ones.
Then I think, as has been alluded to by the parish council, the height of the buildings and the need for a plateau. Can I ask why you've focused on that flattening out of the land and a plateau, which in many cases might look like you're raising the buildings to a higher level than would normally be acceptable?
Yes, thank you. So as I made in the comment I made in the statement, one of the things that we've done with this application as opposed to the previous application is the retention of the trees on the existing access road into the site. And in order to do that and ensure that we're building outside the tree protection zones of those trees, we've had to look at the way the earthworks works across the site. As I'm sure for everyone that's visited at the moment, the site is very much a bowl. The previous application, the outline application that was put to committee back in April, we had 3 development plateaus. So that's the finished level of the site before the building is built. On this application, in order to work around the constraints with retention of the trees and other constraints, we now have a single plateau across the site. Now, that plateau in some areas is higher than the previous application, but in some areas is lower. But the important point to make here is the maximum height of the buildings and how that relates to what was previously proposed. So as has been mentioned previously here this evening, the heights on the buildings across all 3 zones, the maximum heights are now lower. The height on zone 1 is just under 1 metre lower than it was previously. The maximum height on plot 2 is just under 2 metres lower than it was previously, and the height on plot 3 is just under 3 metres lower than it was previously.
Then my second question is this. I was grateful for this. It probably prompted more questions than it gave answers to, if I'm honest. There is no note on here when you are the end occupier will be moving to electric only vehicles, and I just wonder when that is.
The issue of electric vehicles is obviously a relevant one. So are you talking about cars or HGVs?
If you'd explain both, I think that would help the committee.
Okay. So every employee at a certain level within our business, whether that be a store manager or above, is ordered the opportunity to hire a company car, myself included. And I can't think of a single employee that is ordering a car that is not electric or hybrid. Okay, so the car park is just over 350 spaces. At the moment, we have 37 because that is your policy requirement. The reality is we will require more spaces than that. But I believe through planning policy, you can only ask me for your policy requirement. We will be installing more because we'll have more staff. And even our staff that don't have a company vehicle are able to use those chargers for free. It's a benefit that we provide. Turning to HGVs, I will be clear in the fact that the majority of the current estate runs off diesel. However, I tried to allude in my speech, without going into too much detail, the world is changing and we are changing with the world. We recycle the food that we can't donate. And if you want to give you the explicit details of that, where are they? So all the unused food is taken to a digestion facility. Gas is created, that gas is stored in the grid network, and then our vehicles are allowed to go to a certain filling station that has that liquid. So you give to one system and you take from another. At the moment, we're aiming for 10% of our fleet. Our new distribution centre that's due to open in Luton next year, we are aiming for that to be 100%, which will mean that 25% of our fleet by 2023. We're also trialling electrical only deliveries in June or July to see if we can sustain vehicles on purely electric only. Without wishing to talk about my competitors, I saw on LinkedIn last night that Tesco are actually trialling a delivery truck with solar panels on top of it to charge it as it goes. The world is changing, we are changing with the world, we are a sustainable business and we will change. But in answer to your question, I believe we will be phasing diesel out over the forthcoming years.
I'd just also like to make the point that with regards to all of the buildings across the site, at day one, we will be installing the 15% EV charging points in the car parking spaces as per policy. But in addition to that, there will be 50% of the car parking spaces will have passive EV connectivity. So in other words, the above ground charging station won't be there, but all the ductwork underneath the car park will be there to enable them to be retrofitted.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Question for Mr McGuinness, please. Over here. You're all right, don't worry, you're looking over there, over here. The previous application that came through and the tenant wasn't part of that, and we didn't get to questions, so commend you for being here this evening to actually answer the questions. Thank you for that. I'd like to know whether your investment is, because you said Basingstoke is a strategic location for you, you see Basingstoke as being key to you. Is your investment absolutely solely tied to this location, or do you see in the statement you gave us that Basingstoke is a strategic location in the general sense, and then of course you're taking the opportunity of making this application before us this evening, which has to be judged on its merits in front of us. But I would like to know, is your investment in Basingstoke utterly and totally tied to this one specific location?
I would answer with yes. We have a legal agreement in place that ties our investment to this location. As part of our preparation work, we model all the new stores, and I have the benefit of seeing where every store is built in the country and how our network expands beyond that. That has led to a requirement for us to be located within Basingstoke. It works because of store locations, future store locations, and My honest feedback is this is the perfect location for a distribution centre. It's easy in, easy out off the motorway junction. All of our vehicles, our heavy goods vehicles, will use that junction, and there will be no impact further into Basingstoke. So I'm not quite sure I've answered the question, but my clear commitment is we are tied to this site, yes.
Thank you. I get the nuance of the answer you gave, and it's helpful.
Can I also just add to that that...
I didn't ask the question of you, I asked the question of Mr McGuinness. I don't mean to be rude, but I did ask the question of Mr McGuinness specifically a little. Thank you very much.
Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Well, it's absolutely commendable that Lidl are carbon neutral and all these plans are fantastic. But do we know who we've got in the other two units and whether their commitment to carbon neutral and environmental measures is the same as the commitment we're seeing from Lidl? Or is all their hard work going to be undone by the occupants of the other two warehouses or buildings?
Thank you for the question. So, as I alluded to in my speech, we are already in conversations with a number of local occupiers with regard to the remaining two buildings on site. We're not at a stage tonight to be able to confirm who those occupiers are. However, what I can say is that all of the occupiers we are talking to across our whole portfolio are really prioritising sustainability and green energy in there. We all know from everything else that's going on in the world, this is the direction of travel. It is very much becoming a key requirement for occupiers now. And we as a developer have got to move with that. So the specification of the buildings that are proposed this evening, significantly go further than the policy requirements, significantly go further than what a lot of our competitors are doing in terms of it being BREEAM excellent, in terms of our commitment to making sure 15% at day one of the roofs are covered in PV. The roofs are, the roof spaces are enabled to retrofit the rest of the roofs with PV. So I can absolutely categorically say that the market at the moment and the requirements on developments like this are very heavily driven by the sustainability credentials.
Thank you.
I've got a question. It's been said that this is 60% smaller than the previous application. Can you explain how that manifests itself? Is it 60% smaller in footprint, or is it that there's less mezzanines in there and the reduction is achieved that way? Is it volume of the buildings? If you could explain that to me, I'd appreciate it.
It is an overall square footage. So the previous application was 270 square metres, which included the footprint and the mezzanine floors within building one. This application is 60% reduced on that, and it is predominantly with the removal of the mezzanine floors from building one.
Okay, so as I understand that, the buildings physically on the outside dimensions are not 60% smaller than they were previously.
The 60% reduction is in the overall floor space of the buildings.
Okay, thank you. I see no further hands up, so thank you very much. And our next speaker is Councillor Diane Taylor. Good evening, Councillor Taylor. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to emphasise one or two key points in light of the presentation just given on behalf of the applicants. So first of all, the reason for refusal of the last application has been emphasised already, detrimental to the character and visual amenity of the landscape and would fail in regard to important views. That's in the contrary to policy EM1. The key question then is, does this scheme solve these issues? How different is it from the previously refused one? And I would urge you, if you're able to with your papers, to look at the picture of this and compare it to the refused one and ask, Can we honestly say that this scheme is so different that those key objections are overcome? There is, as we've already heard, marginal reduction in external size and impact. Will the character and visual amenity, those views, suddenly be okay now? And I'm trusting, after the Chair's question, that the claim of a 62% reduction in scale is not going to fool committee members who know by now that the reduction is almost entirely due to the removal of internal floor space. The external impact remains immense. And by the way, when looking at that impact, we have in the past managed to ignore the fact that the land to the northwest of this development, owned by the Society of Merchant Venturers, will be developed in the future. The viewing panel again didn't get to see the full impact from that land, but future homeowners will be looking out of their windows and sitting in their gardens with the panoramic view of these warehouses. And here's another fundamental point, and this has been touched on by Councillors Harvey and Freeman, and I'm grateful for that. This is one that really concerns me. Is this prime site honestly going to meet the employment needs of Basingstoke? Are we being sold a convenient but unproven message here? I did the most rudimentary research, and I apologise that it was very rudimentary. I Googled warehouse jobs in Basingstoke. The first agency that popped up on my screen stated, we have 64 warehouse jobs in Basingstoke. So then I Googled the most well-known job agency and asked for information on warehouse jobs within a 25-mile radius of Basingstoke. And up came 17 pages advertising 520 warehouse jobs, some for multiple vacancies and loads in Basingstoke. Now, the government's white paper on levelling up, out of which Basingstoke was scored in the top 10 best places to live, isn't that great, seeks to ensure that, and I quote, existing skills are aligned with future demand. Are we honestly able to say that there is a future demand for warehouses in Basingstoke, given the evidence, or rather the lack of it? At the very least, this whole claim of employment needs simply must be investigated more rigorously. This rushed process hasn't done that. There is no convincing evidence, as far as I can see, of proven need as required by policy EP1M.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Many of the jobs created on this site will be taken by people shipping in from elsewhere, and that's the very last thing that Basingstoke needs. It's all very well asserting that employees will be encouraged to use transport methods alternative to cars, but if they're coming from far afield, they're not going to be cycling or taking the bus to work, especially if their shift is in the middle of the night. And further, well, I won't go on to the fact that we've got so many other empty warehouses that really should be redeveloped first before you take another prime site. Basingstoke is, and I'm sure we'll all agree, it's a top town that specialises in tech industries and is earmarked for a brand new hospital, as we've heard from our MP, with all the potential for subsidiary tech industries and research facilities that a hospital like that will bring with it. And yet we're considering wasting our potential and allowing a prime site, a welcome to Basingstoke site, to be wasted on warehousing. Once we get this, there's no going back. We will be selling our reputation and character down the river, mainly now to avoid the hassle of pressure from developers, if I'm honest.
Could you wind up, please?
Okay, I will wind up. I think this corner of Basingstoke, this gateway, this prime site is worth defending, and I urge you to refuse this and aim for the best, not the most currently expedient. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Taylor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you could have a wipe down, the wipes are there in front of you. Councillor Hannah Golding. Good evening, Councillor. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. This site is not in the local plan, and yet somehow it's being treated as if development here is inevitable and democratically agreed. To put it simply, it hasn't been. This is a greenfield site at the entryway to our town and should be protected from unnecessary and ugly overdevelopment. For those who may argue it's mentioned in the vision for the land around Junction 7, it is. However, if committee takes that into consideration, then they must also take the hospital into account as well, because it's in the same strategic document. Things can't be used selectively, and you have already heard from Maria Miller MP the severe consequences this application is likely to have on any future quality healthcare in our borough. I have to admit, although I respect them, I am quite surprised by some of the judgments by our officers, and I hope that committee this evening looks at the evidence and comes to a different conclusion. The idea of our urban design team accepting such a huge and unattractive building at a gateway site because other towns are already ugly is just bizarre to me. As councillors, we are elected to know our local areas and to fight for the best for it. And this means that looking at other towns and learning from their mistakes and not accepting them is inevitably acceptable. And the fact that these buildings are not significantly smaller and therefore more visually appealing or acceptable than the previous outline application that was recommended for refusal. The floor space is less, but the size of the building is pretty similar, which once again leads to confusion as to why the impact on the landscape was unacceptable originally, but is now recommended for approval. In fact, with the removal of the bund, the warehouses are likely to be even more visible from Dummer, a point that Historic England have made when they objected to the application, because it directly impacts on Dummer's heritage zone. The views from North Waltham also remain obtrusive and unacceptable to local residents, and I hope to committee members this evening. In terms of the environment, I think committee must examine and acknowledge that healthy ecological systems cannot exist in a vacuum. I am really pleased to see the oak trees being protected, but the idea that they and the wildlife living around them will not be damaged by a near constant flow of HGV traffic is very strange. The absence of a minimal protective 20-metre buffer from the canopy edge of the oak woodland just reinforces the evidence that this is overdevelopment of the site and poor mitigation has been offered by the developer. Strategically, this council has declared an ecological emergency, and having green corridors where wildlife can move and migrate freely are a vital part of addressing this, which this application would build right over. Sadly, proposals such as a retaining wall varying from 2 metres to 7 metres tall is not wildlife friendly. It won't allow for migration and will be incredibly harmful for the existing wildlife, despite the lovely inclusion of a new pond.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. It is our job as local councillors to make decisions that work for our borough. I see why this application works for the developers. It's an incredibly convenient and lucrative site, but I completely fail to see why this works for our local residents or our local environment. This is not what we should be aspiring to for our town. It's not going to provide high-quality jobs that we need. We must do better and seek better for our residents, both in the surrounding villages but also in our town. We deserve a town that we can be proud of, with entrances that welcome people and set the scene of the market town that we love. This application does not provide that, as well as putting key infrastructure at risk for our future. It is not policy compliant, it is not in the local plan, and this overdevelopment does not have to be accepted. We do not have to sacrifice green fields for this, and I hope that committee will reject it this evening.
Thank you. Questions? No? No questions. Thank you very much. If you can have a wipe down. The next name on my list is Councillor Rebecca Bain, but I can't see her. So we will move on to Councillor Katecha. Good evening, Councillor Katecha. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Chair and Committee. I'm presenting 7,500 residents of Hetchhorn and Beggarwood and Kemshot. No one has taken in consideration about the traffic that will be caused on A30 with this warehouse. It will cause so much headache for the residents that we would be looking at a disaster here. Also, one side we've looked at junctions 7 and 8, but not junction 6, because that will also cause, when we have deliveries coming from the other side of from London on the M3, that will cause problems on junctions 6 as well, because most set-nav navigation systems will put them through junction 6, straight through town of Basingstoke and onto the A30, which is a single lane area. And this will cause not only traffic but pollution. you have trucks, HGVs, going along this road 24/7. And then from the south, on Junction 7, we'll have the same problem. This will cause a problem also when we have a hospital on the other side due to the fact if there's an emergency. Are you going to tell someone that, sorry, your relation passed away because the ambulance couldn't get through because there was little trucks on Junction 7 blocking this area? We've got enough happening on that side. We've got another 1,700 houses being built on the 1,000 on the golf course and also Henson Fields 750. I have been talking to the residents for the last year and they've told me that they would prefer a science park with a green roof, which means that it will actually blend into the environment. It will be much smaller than the warehouse and it will be actually also powered naturally, like with, what do you call them? I forgot the technical term, but basically it would be, in a sense, green roof would basically make it look like a countryside. It'll be lower. It won't be ugly. All the residents have told me that this warehouse would look very ugly. I'm talking about 7,500 people who live in this area. We're not only talking about Dummer, we're talking about Hedgewarren, we're talking about Oakley and Kempshop. And they want to make sure that they do not have this warehouse because it does affect their lives. And they prefer the science park due to the fact it won't be only a science park, it'll be R&D as well. And there'll be other small businesses in there which will create the correct or the jobs that we have and the sort of skills we have in Basingstoke. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Katecha? No, thank you very much. If you could just have a wipe down as you leave. And we'll have Councillor Frost. Good evening, Councillor Frost. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Committee. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak on this application. Chair, Committee, the reason why I'm not sitting with you tonight is because I am predetermined against this warehouse development on this site. And should the committee recommend that this application be refused, I would not want my predetermination to be the reason for a successful appeal to the Planning Inspectorate. Having read the papers in front of you tonight, I simply cannot support this application for the following reasons. One, the development is located in a rural location which will destroy over 140 acres of prime grade 3A agricultural land and will dominate the landscape rather than be sympathetic to the surrounding landscape, contrary to the policy EN1 and also EP4 ENF. Okay, for those of you who've got copies of the local plan in front of you. The proposed warehousing, basically, they're enormous. Unit 1, despite being lowered from the previous application by some, as I understand it, 4.3 metres with the removal of the mez floor, okay, but due to an increased plateau height, this height reduction is, as you've heard this evening from previous speakers, is just under a metre. This will dominate the skyline, and as I understand it, any proposed planting will take 10 to 15 years to even start making a dent in hiding the visible monstrosities. If I were on the committee tonight, I would be looking at refusing this application, and I suppose the applicant is probably thankful that I'm not, okay? But I'd be looking to refuse this application on EM4 and biodiversity. I do struggle to understand that while it's been claimed that there's a biodiversity net gain of between 10 and 25%, I cannot understand how, as a result of concreting over up to 140 acres, okay, you can get a biodiversity net gain. I just can't comprehend it because the algorithm that is used, okay, comes out with a single metric and may not reflect the broader context of this development. I'm the first to admit that after speaking to the planning officer, I do not understand the biodiversity net gain, how it's calculated, and so cannot make a decision one way or another or apply any weight to it. I have requested that a councillor briefing on this, okay, this subject, is to clarify my understanding and potentially many others. Okay, but until I understand it, I cannot use the biodiversity net gain to form a decision to approve this application. I simply cannot understand how you can have a biodiversity net gain increase if you're going to concrete over and destroy up to 140 acres of prime agricultural land. Light pollution. Currently, this site on the M3 and between the M3 and the A30 is dark, as you've heard.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you very much. Okay, this proposed application will have significant light pollution, and despite conditions to shield lighting, there will still be significant light spillage. Finally, traffic. There seems to have been little or no assessment of the impact of traffic on the local roads. The claims that HGVs will only use Junction 7 is unlikely and cannot be substantiated. I think that HGVs will use the surrounding areas and minor roads together with the town centre to reach Junction 6, the M3, M4 at Reading and the A339 to Newbury to access the A34 to the north or the M4 heading towards Wales. So, therefore, if I was asked to consider this application, I'd be minded to refuse it. Okay, and I would be minded to refuse it on the grounds of EM1, CN9, EP1, because that's regarding a small-scale economy in the rural economy, and also EM4. You know, and I do not envy the committee at having to assess this and make a decision. Okay, so good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Frost? No? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair.
And Councillor Patty. Good evening, Councillor Patty. Councillor Frost has conveniently left your microphone on for you. You have 4 minutes. I'll remind you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members. This application of proposed giant distribution site at this junction 7 of the motorway, which has a massive infrastructure deficit, the inbound and outbound of the junction is so weak to sustain the volume of traffic. It will be gridlock for the users of this junction, and especially my constituents who are regular users will suffer a great deal. Whether it is Lidl or Amazon, the usage will be the same. It will have a destructive impact on the landscape, keeping with the character and the visual amenity of the area. This proposal is contrary to National Planning Policy Framework 2021 and policies of Basingstoke and Dean Local Plan. There are potential archaeological interests on the site, which is contrary to the NPPF 2021. The quality of life for the residents in the neighborhood will be downgraded and bring lots of grief with this application. Cannot, for the sake of employment opportunities and investment, destroy the character and not keeping in with the idyllic area of our borough by urbanizing a shire countryside and agricultural site. This is not sustainable development. It will not bring a strong competitive economy. It will not promote healthy and safe communities. It will not promote sustainable transport. Instead, the contrary, it will not make effective use of land, which could be allocated for a medical research center or a science museum. Especially, the hospital is designated to come nearby. Biodiversity and natural environment will not be protected. Historic environment will be destroyed. We have again objections glow from the public because we care for this area.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Because we care for this area and our people, we are still concerned about the loss and destruction of trees. I am also concerned about the infrastructure of the proposal, of the proposed roads, roundabout, and most important, the designated hospital site will be completely affected by this development. The floodplains around the area and the lack of drainage will be disastrous to the incoming hospital. The sleepy village of Dummer will be most affected by noise pollution, light pollution. We are attempting to build a monster of a distribution center. We welcome the acute and critical care hospital and also a new hospital in our town and borough. I would humbly request the members of this committee to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Putty? No? Thank you very much, Councillor Putty. If you could just have a wipe down. We go to questions to officers, and I'm going to start the ball rolling by asking Mike to go through a few things about prematurity, about the hospital, about the settlement policy boundary, about future views, all things that have come up, and conditioning of solar. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I think to start with prematurity was your first query. I know a lot has been discussed this evening in terms of prematurity in the context of emerging local plan, hospital site, etc., and that's all as detailed in the report as well. You'll see there's a lot of representations on that, so that has all been fully considered. I'm going to draw members' attention in particular to page 73, where we deal with the issue of prematurity, and the hospital through to page 75. The role that the committee has to take is the local planning authority has to come to a decision on this planning application and how that deals with the issues that have been raised in terms of prematurity. I think the key element here is paragraph 50 of the MPPF, which is set out at the top of page 74, sets out, the, if you like, the conditions in which prematurity could be used as an argument, i.e. approving an application or refusing an application, as it may be, ahead of something else happening. And what it clearly says is that refusal of planning permission on grounds of prematurity will seldom be justified where a draft plan is yet to be submitted for examination. So in terms of what's, I guess, coming down the line in terms of the emerging local plan, this council has not reached that stage and is quite some distance from that. The submission to examination is going to be spring to summer 2023, so we are not at that stage yet. So effectively we fail that test in terms of an argument around prematurity. I think the second point, thinking of it in terms of the current local plan, policy EP1, which was brought in through the examination and dealt with the issue of test of soundness, which again is detailed in the report, allowed for the fact that an application could come forward for storage and distribution in advance of a development plan document. So there's no issue of prematurity there in terms of how that works with the current local plan either. In terms of the relevance to the site for a new hospital, again that is detailed in midpoint of page 74. In planning terms, the hospital isn't a committed site. So it doesn't form part of a development plan document or a local plan update. It doesn't have planning permission. So again, there's not a prematurity position that can be taken there. And in particular, I'd draw members' attention to the fact that when you consider the previous applications, when these issues were also raised and were valid issues to raise, that did not form part of the reasons for refusal on that previous application. So I think that deals with the officer advice in terms of prematurity as clearly as we can, and is all consistent with what we've already set out in the report. The other aspect, I think, a lot of suggestions have been made around what alternative uses could be for the site. Again, I would draw members' attention to the need to consider the planning application before you. It can't be refused simply because there's a desire, as well intended as that may be, for there to be a different type of use proposed. you have to determine the application on the merits of what's before you this evening.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry? No, goes to the other question. Questions for the officers? Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, and it relates, I suppose, because of the update paper we got. Can you confirm that this particular site is actually in the AONB or not?
I can confirm that this site is outside of the AONB, and I think it's approximately 4.5 kilometres away from the AONB.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. This is in regards to something the developer touted as essentially a bragging right. They said they're BREEAM excellent rated or something along those lines. I'm not familiar with that particular credential, so I don't know if the impact that they seem to put on it is justified as being impressive in any way. I don't know if you could clarify.
So the BREEAM standards are sort of standards for sort of energy efficiency and sustainability. There's lots of different criteria to meet in order to achieve a particular level, whether it's fair, good or excellent. Of course, as the applicant has indicated, they are looking for that upper end of the BREEAM standards as excellent. The application was accompanied by a sustainability and energy efficiency statement, which you will note is conditioned. So they would have to bring forward that the measures that they are seeking to achieve on site in relation to matters such as water efficiency, energy efficiency, air tightness. You're also aware that there's a commitment for solar panels. It goes through all different measures of how a development can achieve that high level of environmental awareness as such.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. An explanation of, as Councillor Frost indicated, of how you work out a biodiversity net gain. That might be useful for both this committee and people watching.
So, in terms of biodiversity net gain, so there has been what we sort of refer to sort of calculators, which have been produced, for example, one by DEFRA, where all different types of habitats are given a sort of a weighting or a unit size. So sort of whether it's aquatic, woodland, grassland, agriculture, urban development, they all have a criteria, and they're all fed into, essentially, it's like an Excel spreadsheet, which can be used to calculate what a site is going to develop and what it could lose from a site, but also what it could gain in terms of units. For example, on a site such as this with agricultural land, an agricultural field, which potentially has crop rotation, it has inputs, it's likely to have a lower value in this calculator than, example, a woodland. So it's all these different values are essentially fed into a spreadsheet, which is a standardised method of approach that we have now, in order to present what they can gain on site in terms of their biodiversity interest, as we refer to as biodiversity net gain. When we're referring to biodiversity net gain, we also refer back to our policy EM4, which looks to achieve a biodiversity net gain. It doesn't stipulate a percentage. We don't have that in our policy. There is no statutory requirement to achieve a certain percentage of biodiversity net gain. Our landscape, trees and biodiversity SPD refers to a 10% sort of achievement level. This development is looking to go beyond that at 25%, with I think it's a 9% increase on hedgerows as well. So it is just simply at this stage a measure. They say this is something that's been factored into the application. They are able to demonstrate that they are able to achieve a higher net gain on this site than exists at present.
I've got Councillors Tomlin, Konechko, Freeman and Rattigan on my list. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I saw it flash up on the slides, but could we look at, if I'm right, the green infrastructure strategy map, and could you point out where this site lies within the, I think, the corridors that it shows, Whether you can zoom into it, I'm not sure. Yes. So can you clarify for us on that, please?
So if members, if I take you sort of to central to the slide where you can see a pink line going vertically and then heading in a south-east direction, you see a sort of a...
Oh, thank you.
Sorry. So if you can see the sort of pink line that extends in a south-east direction, you will see a little red star. That's the position of the site.
So, and what is the purple band?
Unfortunately, we can't quite read the text at such small scale, but it does refer to a buffer zone.
So the site is located in a buffer zone, is what we're alluding from that, yes?
Yes, it is within that buffer zone, yes.
Councillor Konechko.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about traffic impact. The focus of the paper, perhaps understandably, is on the impact of traffic on the M3, A30, particularly around Junction 7. But as a couple of the speakers have mentioned tonight, it's possible that there will be some HGV movements through the town, particularly if for example, if a lorry is moving on from the distribution centre to Reading or to the M4 to the southwest. Has there been any analysis around this? And if there has, are you able to give us a brief overview of what that's telling us? Thank you.
I mean, the starting point is that the application has been subject to consultation with both Hampshire County Council Highways as the local highway authority and National Highways, or Highways England, whatever they're called now, National Highways. So both of those have come back with no objection in terms of the analysis of traffic. Again, also this application is proposing a lower traffic level to the previous applications associated with that reduction in floor space. In terms of traffic movements, for example, HGV movements, it is quite likely that there could be some HGVs serving stores, other places within the town itself. However, with HGV movements generally, as you will see from the planning conditions, it is conditioned to be that they will go via the M3 only. And that is written into the operational traffic management plan.
Can I ask a supplementary? But presumably, for example, they are going to Reading, they would go on from Junction 7 to Junction 6 and then cut across the ring road to get onto the A33. So there would still be an impact on the town's road infrastructure in that case. Yes, it's mitigating it or minimising it because it's not going down the A30, but it will still have an impact on traffic flows elsewhere.
That is correct, and that is within the report before you. Yes.
Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Going back to the Biodiversity Net Gain, because I must admit I'm not really sure how it works either, is additional weighting given to the age of the existing habitat? So, for instance, if it's been there sort of like 50 to 100 years, it's got a lot of established things there. Is it, is that something that will be given additional weighting, or is it just woodland has got, say, like 5 points and grassland has like 2 points? How does that work? Because I've often thought that getting rid of an established habitat and then replacing it with the same amount of trees is not the equivalent. So how does that work?
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. So, in terms of what's set out in the report, the application has been supported by, as you'd expect, biodiversity, various reports that deals with all the issues around protected species, and I think the report sets out that in relation to sorry, referred to page 99 in terms of protected species. That's in relation to bats, dormice and then breeding birds, as well as in relation to great crested newts and reptiles. So that deals with the protected species part. In terms of the different types of habitat, what the report sets out is, I suppose, in terms of the hierarchy, This does not deal with irreplaceable habitats. It does, in this instance, deal with key habitats and priority habitats, in particular with, I suppose, the impacts being the loss of hedgerow on site and its sort of mitigation through that loss and the sequence of reprovision that has to be done to secure that under policy EP4. And obviously, as you're aware, through the change in the application, so that the priority habitat was identified previously in terms of the trees is retained. So yes, there are different types of habitat. They are impacted by how old, I guess, they are in some instances, but it is a case that there's no irreplaceable habitats put forward under this or affected by this proposal.
So if I'm understanding it, if you say like you've got 10 oak trees that have been there, say 100 years, and then you chop them down, but you plant 20 new oak trees, is that classed as a biodiversity net gain?
I don't think there's a way of answering that directly in terms of this application, because that's not the proposal that's before us, I'm afraid. I take the point that Councillor Frost raised about member training around Biodiversity Net Gain, which we can pick out of, obviously, outside this meeting, but I think the key issue here is that the Biodiversity Net Gain has been identified against the way that the metrics work. They're accepted metrics. They've been tested by a biodiversity officer who has confirmed that they are achieved to the values of, I think it's 25% and 9% that's been quoted in the report.
Okay, thanks very much. I think, yeah, a briefing on biodiversity would be good, but that's not for this meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Parish Councillor Jones often raises foul water usage, sewage, when we speak in council. I wonder how you can confirm that you are content with the sewage and foul water drainage and the use of water within the site.
So in terms of foul drainage, I turn members' attention to page 107 of your report, which sets out how the foul drainage would be addressed. So there would be discharge from the site, and there has been discussions with Thames Water on how this would fit into a public foul system that would then be conveyed to the Chinham Wastewater Treatment Works. And of course, any foul drainage system would need that authority under the Water Industries Act, which of course sits outside of the planning system. So that's part of separate discussions with Thames Water as a statutory undertaker. In terms of water use, then of course we also have policy EM9, which looks at sustainable water usage on the site. And you will note from the report that the applicant is seeking to achieve that BREEAM Excellent level in line with our policy.
Chair, it's just to come back to, apologies, at the very beginning you asked me a question about prematurity, but also you asked me to confirm the position in relation to future solar panels and the potential for condition. I think it probably follows on from a point Councillor Tomlin raised in the speakers. I think in essence there isn't a position that you can take in terms of requiring a planning condition, because as we've had in this forum before, we don't have the policies to support that, so you can't request it by planning condition. You absolutely can include an informative to effectively draw the applicant's attention to the fact that you would like to see all opportunities taken. We have the relevant informative on there that deals with the issue of climate emergency and seeks applicants in all their workings to do the best they can to sort of minimise impacts, but you could add an additional one on if you so wished to I guess encourage that, but you can't effectively put it on as a planning condition.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Tomlin, second question.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard from several speakers, the oak trees. Is there or is there not a 20-metre buffer? If there isn't, why not?
What I can indicate is that the development is to sit outside of the root protection zone. Now, whether that's a 20-metre buffer from the canopy, I don't have that answer, but what I can confirm is that you have no objection from your tree officer, and that is also subject to conditions seeking further protection on site. So the application as it stands doesn't have any objection on tree grounds from our tree officer.
Councillor Howard Sorrell, second question.
Sorry, I didn't realise it was my second, so I'll have to ask the more important of the two that I had. Possibly more for the benefit of the public than for myself. We received a report from Cage, and they specifically cite the loss of agricultural land of grade 3A. I had a brief Google, so I'm somewhat familiar with what that actually means, but I'm sure the experts can give us a better summary of what that means in this context, and whether that's something that we should be prioritising, giving more weight to it as potentially a reason for refusal.
So if I draw members' attention to page 81 of your agenda, which sets out this relationship to the grade of the agricultural land. So agricultural land, according to its quality, has been graded by, I think it was Natural England, to have 5 grades from 1 to 5, 1 being very high quality to 5 being low. Grade 3 is divided into 3A and 3B, so you have 2 different areas. This particular application is proposing development on grade 3A agricultural land, which is considered to be best and most versatile agricultural land, so it sits up there with that sort of medium to good quality. It is something that is taken into consideration and has been given consideration within the context of the application, looking both at the use of the site, the extent of land that is within that grade that would be lost, its wider context, and also it is part of that overall planning balance when you're considering the loss of, in this case, 38.7 hectares of that grade 3A land, compared to what other benefits are coming forward as part of that development proposal. So it is all part of that planning balance.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. My query relates to traffic movement, specifically page 119. And we are talking here about the operational phase, and the prediction is a 30% increase across the 24-hour period during weekday AM or PM. So that's actually stated. Doesn't say whether it includes any other developments. So I'm assuming it doesn't, because they aren't able to predict. So there's a further 1,700 homes to be added to that. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Court. So effectively, when the transport assessment comes in, it's required to deal with all committed developments. That means development that's already got permission and is a commitment. Hampshire County Council confirmed in part of their consultation response that all committed development had been taken into account in arriving at these figures, and confirming there no objection. So the existing committed development has been taken into account.
Sorry, can we be clear, the current or the proposed new ones?
Sorry, so anything that's a committed site, so for example, golf course, Hampson Fields, would have been taken into account as part of the committed development.
So that includes the golf course and the rest of those are. So is there anything else which is potentially going to be in planning which could affect that figure?
I mean, in essence, that is the role that the Hampshire Highway Authority have undertaken. They've scrutinised the transport assessment in terms of what that list of committed development is, and explicitly in their response confirmed they're satisfied that all elements that needed to be taken into account have been taken into account.
Okay, thank you very much. And there is one statement left, which is on the top of 113. Under worst case, it says there will be some driver delay at the A3030 Southwood corner in peak hours. But it's not sought to say what that would be. Is it 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? Because either way round, that's a busy junction now.
So in terms of the Hampshire Highways response, there wasn't a specific figure quoted. What they have confirmed is that there's no element of the proposal that they would term to result in a severe impact, which is the test for then refusing a planning application.
And finally, if I might, going back to page 112, 816, 17, it says average circa 30%. So that doesn't even seek to indicate what that might be peak.
I think this is in relation to the National Highways position on the M3.
It is, I'm afraid.
So there isn't anything more than that, but again, in terms of what the National Highways have stated, they are again satisfied that there's not a severe impact in terms of the operation of the slip roads. That's one thing they particularly drew out in their consultation response.
Could I just ask for clarification what a severe impact is?
It's always going to be a matter of planning judgment ultimately. So there isn't a number or a statistic that I can provide for you. It will be a matter of planning judgment. But National Highways and Hampshire, both consistent with this application and for the much larger applications that came before, raised no objection. So their effectively assessment was that there was not a severe impact.
Any more questions for officers? Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a follow-up question from Councillor Tomlin. Can we go back to the drawing with the corridor, nature corridor? Just want some clarification on that. So where the star is, to the northeast of it, I don't see the golf course or Hanson Fields on that. And obviously this development is going to be 1.5 kilometres of warehouse. Does that not affect that drawing in any way? And if so, why isn't it included?
Okay, so this drawing would have been produced prior to those planning permissions being in place. I have added the star for the application site before us tonight, just to assist members in orientating themselves. So yes, those other sites do intrude into that pink area, as does this site, as part of that wider corridor.
A supplementary question then. So am I right in thinking that that corridor, that pink and yellow, will effectively be cut off?
So with regards to the site itself, yes, there is intrusion into there, but what you have to remember from the site plan, and particularly the landscaping plan, is where we get those connectivity routes still going through the site. So at the top of the site, you have that northern end, which is going to be retaining that Oak Tree Avenue and all the biodiversity area to the north of that. Within the site itself, you have that 15-metre wildlife corridor, biodiversity corridor, which sits between plots 1 and 2. So again, linking the site from east to west. North to south, yeah, north to south. And then in the bottom corner, you also have further planting, that woodland planting, that biodiversity net gain, which you can see from the drawing in front of you now. So you do have those connectivities going across the site, as well as lengthways along the site boundaries as well, where there would be that new planting to take place.
Sorry, can I just reiterate that I was talking about Hanson Fields and the golf course not being included on that drawing. And obviously we've got to take those into consideration because they're accepted planning applications and the property's being built. This is going to add another 1.5 kilometres on that and it's not included on that drawing. I just want clarification to see if that corridor will be shut.
We are in questions. Can you ask your question?
Will that corridor be shut off with the present developments and this development?
Yeah, the corridor would still remain, it's still present. Yes, there are interruptions to it, but you would also have to recall that we don't have an objection from our biodiversity officer that would be considering all this green infrastructure and these corridors for biodiversity gain. We don't have an objection from our landscape officer, where they are considering that overall impact on that landscape, which they will be considering that green infrastructure strategy as part of their overall assessment of the application.
I'm sorry, Councillor Tomlin, you've had 2 questions already. I'm being advised no by legal. Are there any new questions? No, in that case, we move to debate. Councillor Gaskell.
My issue with this, and I'll include it in debate, is that we're using data which is out of date because we've got two developments there which are ongoing, and this should have been included on that green corridor. We need to really consider that because that was one of the things we looked at last time, and I don't think it's been addressed here.
Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. There's an awful lot of paperwork associated with this application. There's an awful lot that's come in the post as well, which I'm grateful for because it gives us the opportunity to say that this application has been well and truly heard by this committee, one way or the other. I think it's fair to say that the representations we've had tonight have been thorough as well. so that the application has had a thorough hearing. You can only judge the application based on what's in front of you. Now, my view of it is the hospital is critical, and it is an important, I didn't mean it's a pun, but the hospital is critical, and it must be taken into account in the future. Can we take it into account with this application at the moment in time? The advice is that we cannot. The issue of a science park, I would prefer to see a science park. Can we take that into account? We cannot, because it is again the prematurity argument that's being used tonight by our officers to guide us that we cannot. So while those things are very desirable, and I would much prefer them than the application that's in front of us, we can only judge the application that is in front of us. When it comes to the jobs and the issues that are being discussed, I don't want to talk down the jobs. I've got Sainsbury's in my ward, and I certainly don't want to talk down the jobs that Sainsbury's brings to this town. I think those jobs are important, and they play a part in our calculation. But we cannot judge the application based upon the level of investment that some developer or somebody wishing to take the development on wishes to make. That isn't part of our planning consideration in front of us this evening. We're told that EP1 tells us that we can take this site, that we should be looking for more potential commercial development, and that this site has come forward. That's fine. EP1 doesn't designate this site. Nowhere in the local plan does it designate where that future employment must go. So we have to judge the application on our policies that are in front of us in our current local plan, and whether we think this site stands up to the scrutiny of those policies for this particular use. That doesn't mean that we don't fulfil EP1 somewhere else. It doesn't mean that it cannot be considered in other parts of the town or the borough. When we look at national planning policy and the arguments that have been made, there is much wanting with national planning policy. And to be honest with you, there's an awful lot wanting with our current local plan as well. Now, we've got to take that on board, I think, and take that to somewhere else to discuss what the future local plan might do to benefit a future consideration of an application for the hospital and for the application of the thousands of houses that are going to be proposed around this site. We have to take that away. I respect that the developer suggested, that the applicant's user suggested that they were entered into a legal agreement with the developer. Now, I get that. There was also the point that it's strategically on their map that Basingstoke exists for a variety of reasons beyond just this singular location. They have signed a legal agreement with the developer bringing forward this site, and I totally understand that. That's got nothing to do with our proposal, the application, judging the application in front of us this evening. That is irrelevant. I think the key here relates to a number of things that have been said in the report and to the debate this evening, and that hasn't changed. I think the AONB point is worth making, and I'm glad that question was asked, because it doesn't actually have to be in the AONB to have a direct impact on the AONB. The AONB can suffer harm from development where it can be viewed and seen, and that is the advice we are given from the AONB officers. We're clear that the landscape issues are significant, and my view is that it might well be said by some, and our officers advise, that it is less than substantial harm. It is for us to come to that judgment of how serious we take that. I take it very seriously, and I think there is significant harm done to the landscape in this location. So while I accept the jobs argument, I accept the argument of wanting to see the investment in the town, I put that to one side because that's a separate argument. I judge the site on its own merits, set against our policy framework. And I'm clear in my mind that the landscape impact continues to be of such significant harm in this location that I am struggling to find in my own mind, set against those policies, to approve this application. So from a landscape perspective, I find fundamental flaws continue throughout, from the first right the way through to this application, but it's this one we're judging, not the others. And that is where my mind is currently at the moment, that on the landscape policies, I don't think this application can be supported.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the view that's up here. We saw the our strategic biodiversity corridor maps that we put in our policies, and we can see that obviously they've been impacted because they're not up to date with, as Councillor Gaskell was saying, the the two new developments, this one's going to take more of it out. As regards the split between the two units, the question I wanted to ask, but it doesn't matter now, is is it open for animals to get through? Because I understand the whole site is being surrounded by 2.5 metre high mesh fencing. And it's impossible with the quality of documents that we've got, and even zooming up on our thing, you can actually pick that out. So I didn't get an answer to the question. I assume it's blocked for animals, and they would have to take a bit of a serious leap of faith across the road. So that aside, I agree with Councillor Harvey about the impact to the. There's no difference. The impact to the countryside is still major. Yes, I welcome the retention of the oak trees, and I'm pleased as well that potentially the occupant has a zero carbon outlook on things, which is very welcome, and I'm sad that we have no policies to actually embrace his willingness, that we can't, just for the members' confidence, just to make sure that it will happen. We can't do that, so we have to move on that one. I'm still incredibly concerned of the noise, and I find the highways, again, we don't get the highways come here. Whether we're asking the county to come here, I don't know, but we don't get them here. The noise outside Ganderton Cottage, we read that the road's going to be this soft tarmac. The Highways Authority are actually saying, well, actually that only works at higher speed vehicles, and we've got low speed vehicles accelerating, so they wouldn't think it's very good, and it falls to bits after 4 years. But our people still want to mitigate this and put it in, and I just don't see how that's going to help, how it's going to actually help possibly this land of the merchant ventures in the future. So we have issues there. And then the fundamental thing that our MP, Maria Miller, mentioned, I read with interest Highways, whatever they are, Highways England, their report. They had concerns, they've checked out the modelling. I cannot believe that they have not got an awareness of what's happening along the M3 and the likelihood. It just does not make sense. We're in this, is it LEP, the M3 corridor? It's bizarre that they've legally answered the question of this particular application, but I, for one, wouldn't want to say, well, I allowed this to take place, and look at the chaos we've got on Junction 3, and they're not going to do anything about it because they've got no money, and we lose our hospital. You know, I might need that soon. So I kind of want to see the hospital. So I'm supporting that with Councillor Harvey. We'll let the debate carry on, because we need to air this. It's a very fundamental application.
I've got Councillor Freeman, followed by Councillor Howard Sorrell. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm erring on the same side of the debate. I don't think that we can, in all good conscience, approve such a large warehouse in such a site where we are very near to the area of natural beauty. We've got objections from Historic England, from the Campaign from Rural England, and I really don't see the need for these warehouse jobs. I mean, I did the same as Councillor Taylor. I googled warehouse jobs in Basingstoke. There are 100+ of these warehouse jobs already vacant. And this means that anyone wanting to work at this site is likely to come from outside the borough. And again, it's not going to be sustainable for them to cycle in or walk there. It's going to be more cars, even with this bus service. And we know from previous experience that Stagecoach quite often drop unprofitable services. So the fact that they will want to continue running that service is not a given. I really don't think there is an awful lot that's different. I mean, much has been made of, oh, there's so much less 60% reduction in floor space, but it's not an actual reduction in the height of the building. Well, there is a tiny reduction. I really don't think that there is enough difference from the previous application to warrant an approval. I think it needs to be refused again, because it's not suitable for the area. It's too big, it's too intrusive, it will impact views from the area of natural beauty. I don't think I could approve this at all. Thank you.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. It's a shame that every developer and every applicant, every potential company that wants to come to our area isn't as willing to listen as we've had from this particular application and from this particular developer. They have clearly gone above and beyond, changing things from the previous plan to meet a lot of the concerns, to mitigate a lot of the concerns that we had in the past. And employers like Lidl, we've heard a lot about them tonight from what they've said, their plans for the town and for the future of this site, the future of this warehouse. And I would love to see an employer like them come to the area and offer everything that they seem to have to offer with their forward thinking. Everybody knows that I have my own priorities on this committee. Every member has their own preferences about what they focus on. Mine, unfortunately, in this case, is always biodiversity, is always ecological issues. And despite all of the positives that I can see, all of the progress we've made since the previous application, I'm of a like mind to those that have spoken before me that there isn't enough in the way of mitigation for biodiversity concerns that we can approve it. I would like to see further work with this developer, although I'm not sure if that will happen if we refuse their application again, to reduce the size of the site. Having the single warehouse, I think, would be completely appropriate, because that would leave half the site for biodiversity, for this, what's the phrase? Cage used it. We saw the connection pathway between the various areas of corridor. There you go. That's the word I'm looking for. I would love to see those extra two buildings just gone, because then the corridor impact would be reduced. The retaining wall issue would be essentially mitigated, and it would be something we could approve. But for, I'm assuming, economic reasons, the buildings are there, and so the application, as far as I'm concerned, should be refused. We have our illustrious colleague in the audience tonight who's given us a list of reasons to refuse on. I've read through those policies and I've got a list in front of me, so I will let the debate continue, but if somebody does need at some point to propose a movement to refuse, I have it ready to go.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair, and the debate's been excellent so far. Councillor Tomlin's point about noise, I just want to pick that up. I mean, it won't be the road surface that the noise will come from in the future. Hopefully it's the electric cars are much quieter than the diesel ones currently being used. I just add that to the debate. Obviously, it would have been much nicer to see a science park there or whatever, but we have to judge what's in front of us. And the reality is, as Councillor Howard Sorrell has indicated, this is a huge improvement on what was previously in front of you, if I may say that, because obviously I wasn't the judge of that previously. But, you know, it comes down to a number of things. Is the landscape harm too strong? Will the residents be so hugely impacted by the sight of these warehouses that their enjoyment of their own houses is diminished? Now, that is a judgment call. It's subjective. I think we assess that. Is the plateau the right height? I raised that question with the applicant. You know, there has to be some weight to the officers and the reports that have been given to us that weigh up all of those things to say, yeah, that's okay. The biodiversity point, I think there is a requirement to have better training on that, so as we understand the value of what's being given up for what the value is of what we're receiving on any application. The AONB, well, you know, the AONB is huge. This morning I was up on White's Hill at Kingsclere, and frankly I could see Burfield in the distance and almost to Wiltshire this morning. So it is a difficult call to see what impacts on an AONB. My view is that with two roads either side, this is not as good a piece of land as Whiteshill or some of the other areas within our borough. But the judgment call has to be based upon what we think can we get away with. Now, obviously, somebody's already added that they think that there are ways forward on this site. We shouldn't be held back, and as Councillor Harvey rightly said, it isn't about the hospital. We have no idea whether this hospital will come forward or not. We should not be deciding this on a wish list. Now, we all know we've given them a planning permission in the past and they weren't able to deliver an acute hospital. What is to say that the government might not pool some of the money, even with a minister here tomorrow, that we end up with a revamped site that it currently is? And, you know, I don't want to add any pressure to the minister when he's here tomorrow, but obviously we do need to calculate all of this in our debate. And I genuinely think that the hospital will be a hospital decision, and regardless of what was on this site. You know, in basic terms, as I've already alluded to, this is a better application than previously. But are there still questions to be answered? Yes, I think there are.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to give my sort of input on this, I'd like to stress the fact we are a regulatory committee and not the policy committee. So we have to operate within the MPPF, the law of the land, the local plan. We're not here to discuss what we would and wouldn't really like. I mean, quite interestingly, we've listened to an awful lot of objections tonight about this application, and actually I think they would apply equally to a hospital, so that's one for the future. Is the AONB report, which we received in the supplementary paper, which is quite damning, but is 4.5 kilometres, you know, in or out, that's a bit of an awkward one. And of course, since the last time, the use of farmland has become a bit more of an important item given the way of the world, you know, which is outlined in the NPPF. So actually I find this one a bit more difficult than the previous one because of the change in the situation. So I think that's my input to the debate this evening. Thank you, Chair.
I see no hands up. So, sorry, Councillor Konechko, you did.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm also, I must admit, I'm struggling with this one. I wasn't involved in the previous application process, so this is all new to me. And I have a lot of sympathy with the view that if you're going to locate a logistic site somewhere, putting it very close to a motorway and close to a motorway junction makes a lot of sense. I've also heard the arguments today about jobs, and I completely agree that at the moment where we are currently in the economic cycle, there are a lot of vacancies and very few people looking for those jobs. But you know, if some of the concerns about the economy materialise, and we end up in a recession in the next few years, and perhaps every one of those vacancies will find you know, multiple people looking for it, and we might be grateful for this. All that said, I'm part of a council that within the last 12 months declared an ecological emergency, and I look at this and I struggle to square those two. So I'm leaning towards a refusal at the moment, but it's not an easy one. It's not clear cut in my view. I just wanted to contribute that.
Councillor Rattigan, did I see your hand up again?
You did, thank you, Chair. And it's to add to Councillor Konechko's point about jobs, if I may. Obviously, we are an opportunity borough. You know, we have to be, and we need to be aware of that at all times. Jobs, whether they are low paid or highly skilled, we should always have choices available. And I take the point that there are vacancies within this borough. But that is no bad thing, if I may say so, because that allows people to move up their salaries to fund the food, the energy costs, the tax implications of what our Chancellor has just done. I hope that whenever we look at jobs, we realise that providing them is a necessity of what we do, and therefore opportunity and choice should be one of the hallmarks of us as a borough when it comes to employment. And I just wanted to add that to Andy's point.
Mike, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just, I suppose, as always, to try and assist the committee during a debate prior to any motions being put forward on a number of points that have been raised, and I suppose seek to clarify those in the context, again, of this planning application and in light of previous decisions made. I suppose one point that was raised was in relation to landscape impact, which is clearly before you in terms of assessing whether ultimately enough has been done in this application to make it now acceptable. And specifically references made to sort of on the landscape policies on their own. But I would just stress that the way that the application has to be considered is as a whole. So it includes in the context of policy EP1. So it's not just on one set of policies, you have to take account of all of your policies within the local plan and MPPF. And what policy EP1, how that impacts in terms of, I suppose, where the site is or could be, because as Councillor Harvey, I think, rightly pointed out, it doesn't allocate the site clearly. It has, but it does have some, I suppose, locational requirements in terms of proximity to strategic transport. So there are some issues there that bring about that, and in needing to address the identified economic needs within this local plan period, that is the whole purpose of policy EP1 in the first instance. So within that, as the, I suppose, the most important policy for consideration of this type of application, the landscape impact, it does accept to a degree that there will be a need, there will be a landscape impact, and it talks about the need to mitigate that and minimise that. So that is effectively the test under EP1. You then bring in your valued judgment on that, and so whether it has, I suppose, as I say, addressed it far enough since the previous reasons for refusal given on those. Our assessment is very clear on that, and that is why there's the change, I suppose, in terms of it was asked earlier on why, I suppose, there was a change from compared to the outline, which officers did recommend for refusal, but it is the changes to the application that have led to a recommendation for approval. Picking up on some other points that were raised, again, just for clarification, reference was made to the noise concerns and the effectiveness, I suppose, of the low road noise surface. I know that that was picked up in the Hampshire comments and this issue about the speed of traffic and whether it would be effective. That was looked at again with our environmental health colleagues. They specifically looked at the issue in terms of modelling that was produced by the applicant to, in their view, state that it would be effective to the degree required. So in those terms, that mitigation was deemed acceptable. Reference has been made to, I suppose, two issues on the update paper, the issue of the AONB officer's response and the response from Historic England. Just to be clear, whilst intervisibility is clearly relevant to both of those issues, one is very much a landscape issue in terms of the impact on the AONB, the other is a impact on heritage assets. So in this instance, it was in particular in relation to the Dummer Conservation Area. On the AONB, our analysis has been clear. It's 4.5 kilometres from the AONB. It's outside of the AONB. In fact, our assessment was that we didn't need to consult the AONB because it is that far out. It was a response that was sent in off their own back, effectively. So that is our analysis of the AONB impact. On the Historic England impact, again, comparing this to the outline application, which I think is the most directly comparable because it has the biggest amount of development. It wasn't just a single unit proposed under the full. There was a Historic England objection to that last outline application. It was on this very similar grounds. It raised the same points. Again, the report sets out the reasons why the recommendation is that whilst there is less than substantial harm, the public benefits of the job creation, economic investment, meeting the requirements of policy EP1 in our view outweigh that. And then finally, the issues in relation to biodiversity. I would just stress that yes, biodiversity connectivity is clearly very important. That plan shows the green infrastructure strategy in that regard. It was one of your reasons for refusal on the full application, appreciating that that was a second hearing of that. This application clearly differs from the previous reason for refusal given. Instead of effectively taking away the connectivity in terms of that, those oak trees, it allows for that to be retained, and it has the benefit of providing that connectivity of the 15-metre strip, even with its limitations insofar as it's been described. In addition to that, there is the Biodiversity Net Gain, which, as the report sets out, actually weighs positively in favour of it because it exceeds even the Biodiversity Landscape and Trees SPD requirement for 10%. So all of those issues, Chair, I think need to be considered prior to any motion.
Thank you, Mike. I've got Councillor Freeman followed by Councillor Harvey, and then I think we really need to get some sort of a resolution and bring the evening to an end. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. Part of my notes here, it might be worth remembering that this council actually passed a motion a few months ago to protect the character of rural businesses. Now, I understand at the time this was more from excessive house building in those areas, but I still think it's quite relevant here because I do think this does not protect the character of the rural village of Dummer. And I think that we need to, if we've passed these motions in council, we need to be mindful of them when we're considering our decisions. Just my thought.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I'm conscious of Mike's comments, particularly about the sequence of thought that leads to a view on the landscape issues. And I'm conscious that the point about the strategic location is something to bear in mind. Now, I'm conscious of having Daneshill and Hounds Mills in my own ward. I'm conscious of having Sainsbury's in my own ward, right in the middle of the town centre, not at the edge of the town. So there are a variety of examples we can point to with different weights offered and different arguments offered. And those businesses are incredibly important and equally successful in our borough. And those jobs matter to people. So I certainly don't underestimate Lidl's jobs to people in our town, and I'm sure they would be needed. The question is this location the right location for this site, for this application? Not whether we want Lidl or not. I want Lidl, I'd quite like them to come here, that's great. That's my value judgment on that. That's not the point. The point is, does this site stack up? And my view at the moment, based on the strategic assessment of the policies in front of us, is that the landscape issues, as Mike has rightly set out, bearing in mind Historic England's comments, bearing in mind the OMB comments, yes, they might not have been invited, Mike, but they were nonetheless in, and they are part of something we can consider. So they're in front of us, they are submitted, and we can consider them. And I also say the conservation impact on Dummer, all of those issues weigh up in my mind that the landscape issue for me is still not met.
Thank you. I think the mood of the committee is quite clear, and on that basis I move for refusal based on landscape issues and nothing else. I think it would be very dangerous to add biodiversity in when several people in this room, several members have said they don't understand how the biodiversity is calculated. I understand the principle of it, but I certainly don't understand the mechanics of it. So for myself, when this first came up, 60% smaller. Great, I thought we can go forwards with that. But it's not 60% smaller. It's got 60% floor space, less floor space. It's going to be stacked that much higher inside. So actually, what is the difference? The building isn't 60% smaller. And in landscape terms, which is what everybody in this room is worried about, it isn't any smaller. So there is no 60% reduction in volume. There's a very minimal reduction in height. That is not enough of a change to make me change our mind from a previous decision. So I do move for refusal. Councillor Tomlin, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I will second that motion. But I would throw into it this, because of this green infrastructure corridor, that there's an element of EM4 coming back in as we had before, which I don't see has particularly been addressed in this particular application, but it's your motion.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? Sorry, complete.
Sorry, Chair, I know you put forward a motion for refusal on the landscape impact only, and that's been seconded. And from listening to what you said, it's effectively the same reasons for refusal. It's just to remind members, set on page 67, it relates to the effectively the same essential reason for refusal that was the previous outline, which deals with the issues of landscape impact, the failure to mitigate then under the terms of policy EP1, and the impact on views in and out of settlements and important views into the town. So that is the same, you're saying it's the same reason in that sense. Chair, in which case the only other issue to raise is that as per usual, if there isn't a signed 106, which there isn't, even though the fact is extremely advanced, there would be a second reason for refusal that I'd advise you include in terms of not having a completed 106.
I'm content to add that second reason in as normal. Councillor Tomlin, I assume you're happy with that. Been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I make that. And those against refusal? 4. That is refused. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. The resolution of the committee is to refuse the application, and that is for the landscape reasons I've set out within page 67, drawing on the previous outline reason for refusal, and also for the absence of the section 106. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. That is the end of tonight's meeting, and thank you very much to Mike and Catherine in particular for all the input. Thank you.